Hey everybody, welcome to Unit 11. We are doing trig graphing today. We are going to just jump to the second page here and start talking about all of our vocabulary. So first up, it was on the previous page, is amplitude. So I want to look right over here. Your amplitude is always sitting in the front here, and amplitude is always positive. So we have an amplitude of 1. Okay, frequency. That's this number that's sitting with the x. So what frequency means is that is the number of curves that you will physically see from 0 to 2 pi. Okay, so I like to write that. That is 2 curves from 0 to 2 pi. Period, that's a formula. So if you don't have it memorized yet, let's make sure that this is memorized. Okay, so your period is 2 pi over your frequency. Oh, hello, calendar. Which looks like we would have a period of pi. So what that means, how I label that, is you need that amount of space to see one cycle. So in pi amount of space, you should see one cycle of our graph. And then lastly is midline. So your midline is your vertical shift. So in terms of an equation, it would be y equals -3. And then if we had to calculate it, which we're going to do on the other page, you would do that by figuring out the middle, and the middle comes from an average. Okay, so if you think back to midpoint formula in geometry days, to get to the middle, you take an average. So take the high, take the low, add them, divide by 2. All right, so let's set up our graph. We're going to go every 3 boxes is pi over 2. I'm going to graph the midline. I'm going to put this right here at -3. And then it said over here, I need pi space, okay, so from here to here, to see a whole sine curve. Okay, so now we got to think about, well, what does sine look like? Sine starts at 0, which in our case is the midline. So we're going to say it starts at the midline and it ends on the midline. And the middle is on the midline. And then halfway between those, you should be going up your amplitude. So we are only up 1. So at the halfway point, we're at up 1, and the halfway point, we are down 1. So let's look at my directions now. My directions say they wanted me to graph from 0 to 2 pi. What we've done right now is only graph one cycle. Sometimes that's the directions, is one cycle, then we would be done. We do need to continue on, so we're just going to repeat the process. Starts at 0, ends at 0, or aka the midline for us. And then halfway, we're going to go up to our amplitude and down to our amplitude. And so now what you're seeing is the frequency. There's your 2 curves from 0 to 2 pi. Okay, so those are kind of like your basics. We're going to look at this next one. Max and min comes up a lot on their multiple choice section. And so if we kind of look at our graph, we technically start at the midline, and then to get to a maximum, we just apply the amplitude. We go up an amplitude or we go down an amplitude to get to a minimum. And so that's all this is saying, is start at the midline, tack on an amplitude to get the high value, start at the midline, and subtract to get the low value. So in this case, if I was looking for a max, I'm going to start at the middle, that's the 45, and then remember your amplitude is always positive, so ignore the negative, just take a 20. We're going to go up 20. So highest value to get is 65. Min, start at the midline, but now go the other way. Take away the amplitude. So you'd be at 25. So the other way they could ask that question is they could say, hey, what's the range? Right? What's the range of this graph? That's really what's the min and what's the max. Okay, go right down to the bottom. They could have you look at a graph and try to come up with the equation. So we want to ask ourselves a couple questions. I'm going to come right over here. Does it look like sine or cosine? So we're looking at the second one. It is not starting on the midline, and so that's how I know that this one would be a cosine graph. Is it positive or is it negative? So we've talked about negative cos looks like a ghost. That is not this. So we do not have to worry about a negative. It's going to be a positive. What is the amplitude? Well, let's find the midline. Doesn't look like we have any shifting. So we're right here as our midline. And then if I look from the midline to the high point and the low point, that's your amplitude. So it looks like we have an amplitude of 3. What is the frequency? So definition of frequency is how many cycles do you see in 2 pi space? So here's the problem. You do not have 2 pi space. You only have pi over 2. So you could either envision this graph continuing on and saying to yourself, well, I see 2 curves here, and then in another pi over 2 space, I'm going to get another 2. And then another pi over 2 space, I'm going to get another 2. And then finally I'll get to 2 pi and I'll have another 2. There's your frequency. There's your 8. Okay, so if you're a visual person, you might like that option. If you're more of a formula person, then we're going to rely on our period formula. So period is 2 pi over the frequency. Now remember, we're solving for b. Period is how much space for one cycle. So here's one cycle. It's half of pi over 2. So your period is pi over 4. So I'm going to use my formula here, and I'm going to work backwards to get to the frequency. So I could cross multiply solve here. Those pi's are going to cancel out, and then there's your 8 that we had before. Okay, so that's our b value. We do not have a midline other than the 0, so I don't have to worry about that. So now we just put it all together. Okay, let's got y equals positive amplitude of 3. We said it was a cosine curve. Frequency is 8. And then this would be technically plus 0. So you don't have to include that. Just want to make sure you're thinking about it. All right, let's go ahead and flip to that back page and let's look at one modeling question. The hottest day of the year in Santiago, Chile on January 1st was 30 degrees Celsius. The coolest day was 10 degrees Celsius, which happened on July 1st. So what we're trying to do here is come up with a possible equation and then make a sketch. Okay, to do that, we have some scaffolding questions here to help you. Minimum is your 10, right, the coldest. Maximum was the warmest. So midline, remember that word middle, is an average. Take the min and the max, add them together, cut it in half. That's how you get a midline, okay? In the middle, it's an average. Once you have the middle, then amplitude becomes a lot easier, because now that I know that this is 20, I know I need to get up to 30 and down to 10, my min and my max. That allows me to think about my amplitude here. Okay, I must be 10. Okay, what is period? How long for one full cycle? So we were, in January, we were at a max, and then in July, we were at a min. Well, when we're talking about sines and cosines, I'll draw a cosine here. Here's a cycle of cosine. One full cycle is when you go from a maximum to a maximum or a minimum to a minimum. So right now, from January to July, we're only seeing half of a cycle. So for one full, it is going to be a full year. So we're going to say 12 months. So how do we get frequency? We're going to do that same thing we did on the previous page, where we're going to take that formula for period and we're going to solve. Now that we know the period is 12, we're going to go ahead and cross multiply and solve here to get out our frequency of pi over 6. So now we start putting it together. They've told us they would like us to use cosine. You're starting at a maximum, so we're going to go positive. So positive 10 for our amplitude, cosine, put in your frequency, that was what we just found, and then your midline, make sure that gets tacked on. Okay, let's sketch that. I like to sketch the midline first. And then we are doing one revolution, aka one cycle, which we've already established has to be 12 months. So we're going to be from 0 to 12. That's going to be one cosine curve. Your picture is going to start at the amplitude. So if we have an amplitude of 10, we got to go up to our maximum. So I should say we should start at the maximum. That's probably a better way to say that. We're starting at the maximum. And then cosine is also ending at the maximum. And in between, in the middle, we should be at the minimum. So see your 10 and your 30. Halfway between, hit that midline. And then if we graph that, you're going to see that cosine curve. All right, that's it for today, guys. See ya.